right, I am now going to be beginning the series about social influence within the broader subfield of social psychology. So social influence, how others potentially change our behavior. Now previously we talked about things like changing attitudes. Now we're talking about changing actual explicit observable behavior. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is compliance. You might have heard that term compliance before, like you think of children, is that child being compliant? If a parent says, go clean your room, does the child actually clean their room? That's one example of compliance. Also workplace compliance, your boss, your supervisor tells you to do something. Do you actually do it? Actually, that boss or that supervisor could be perceived as an authority figure, so it might also count as something else that we'll talk about in the next video. But compliance is when you go through with somebody's direct request. Someone actually has to ask you to do something for you to be compliant. So change in a person's behavior that occurs in response to a direct request. So somebody has to say, do this thing. There are times where we change our behavior and nobody asked us to, and we'll talk about that separately in a different video. So with compliance, we are going to talk about two basic types of compliance that can be used for people trying to perhaps change your behavior in terms of giving money, trying to get you on board with doing favors and things like that. And if you take upper level classes, if you take further classes on social psychology, you might learn even more, but we're going to focus on two. All right, so the two that we're going to learn about, they have names that sometimes make students giggle. They have kind of goofy names. In fact, when I took introductory psychology, I had a professor who hated social psychology, and he wanted to skip the whole chapter, but he essentially didn't cover it and told us just read the chapter. Hopefully my students are grateful I'm not doing that. I'm giving you some assistance here. And it turns out I actually likes a lot of things in social psychology. But so he just skipped a lot of things in social psychology, and then I had to take the subject test for psychology for the GRE to get into graduate school. A lot of graduate programs don't require that test, but one of the ones I was applying to did. And so I had to take this test, and it covered some of the things that we're going to go over. And I remember just looking at the practice test for the first time and saying, that's not real. Those are not psychological terms. I would remember that. Turns out I didn't remember it because my professor had skipped it. So what are these wacky terms that made me laugh and think they're not real? They are called the foot in the door technique and the door in the face technique. All right, let's talk about what they are. Let's start with foot in the door. All right, think of a traveling salesman. We don't really have those anymore. I mean, you still have people trying to knock on doors and perhaps spread the word of religion and maybe political campaigns and things like that. But, we don't see a lot of this, but it used to be much more common to have just random strangers come and knock on your door trying to sell you things because we didn't have the internet and stuff. It was much harder to get the word out that you had a product to sell. And so the foot in the door, what would be the foot in the door? Like somebody knocks on your door like, hello, madam, I'm going to tell you about my product. You're like, no, too busy. I don't want to do this today. If their foot is in the door, you can't just slam it in their face. All right. But this is not literally what you do. It's just kind of symbolic. So with foot in the door, with the foot in the door technique, you first get somebody to do something small for you. And then once they've done something small for you, it is actually easier to get them to agree to a large request, to do something large for you. So one example could be, you need to borrow some money. You have a friend where you're like, hey, can I borrow $5 so that I can have lunch or a snack today? And for many friends, that's a fairly reasonable request. And so, hey, you lend the money and you're hoping you'll get paid back someday, but you've established that, hey, you've got a nice friendly relationship. I lend money to this person. I've lent a small amount of money to this person. Well then, in the future, if you have already lent them $5, if they ask you for, say, $50, $100, $500, if you've got it, college students, that's not always a guarantee. You are more likely to lend them that larger amount of money if you have already lent them a small amount of money. And sometimes people will do this with like sales tactics. They'll be like, oh, here, buy this small thing. Oh, we got you to buy a small thing. Would you like to buy the larger thing? Oh, you like that cell phone case. Do you know we sell cell phone plans for way more money than that cell phone case? That can certainly happen. It's not always going to work. But it does it makes it more likely that you were going to go along with the larger requests. Political campaigns also do this. Like, donate today, donate just $5, it'll be a big help. And you're like, okay, I'll donate $5. And then you're on the list. And you get all the text messages. And maybe if you're unlucky, also phone calls and emails. But you get all the things like, all right, oh, we're gonna need more. All right, you've helped us before. Now we need you to donate big. They're hoping that since you've already given a little bit of money, you think of yourself as, okay, I help out these folks. I'm going to help out again. All right. And sometimes I do have students, they'll just say in class, they'll say, this is stupid. Nobody's going to fall for that. Well, folks, research does indicate that not everybody does go along with the larger request, but it is more likely that you'll go along with the larger request when you've gone along with the smaller request. All right, so what is door in the face? What does that sound like? Slam the door in somebody's face. All right, door in the face technique. That is when you start with a large request. Typically, you're starting with a request that is so large that realistically, you're expecting to be denied. You're expecting that they will not go along with that request. And so you say, hey, give me the large request. And you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then they're like, okay, I understand. Well, can you give me a little one? Right. So with the door in the face, you start large, pretty much expecting that you're going to get rejected, you're going to be denied, and then you move in with a small request, which is more likely to be to be complied with, because they feel bad, they've already had to tell you no. Or by comparison, there's even a term for this in social psychology, anchoring. You can anchor values. You'll learn about that if you take a separate class in social psychology. But by comparison, the small request now seems tiny compared to the large request. So this could be something like a friend who's like, hey, I'm having trouble with my tuition. Can I borrow $1,000? And you're like, heck no. I don't have $1,000 to give you. I'm not going to give you $1,000. And especially if it's somebody, they're not your closest friend, you barely know them. It's like, no, I can't, we just met recently. I can't lend you $1,000. Like, okay. Look, I understand you can't give me $1,000. Look, can you give me $10? You are more likely to give them the 10 if you have already turned them down for that larger request. And again, I have students, they'll say, I would never do that. I'm not saying every single person is going to go along with this, just it's more likely. When you have the large request, lead with the large request, and then have them turn you down. You say, okay. Oh, can you give me something? Can you give me something small? All right. So, sometimes car salesmen will do this sort of thing where, they'll be like, here, we got this really awesome, we got this really expensive vehicle over here. And you're like, no, that's out of my price range. Oh, okay. Well, how about this one? It's so much cheaper in comparison. Or also things like computer salesmen and stuff. Sometimes they can take advantage of that. All right. So door in the face technique. Now, at the beginning of the video, I did say I was going to tell you 2 techniques. I lied. There are actually 3. And I'm just remembering that there's another one. So there's actually a third one. So foot in the door and door in the face, they kind of go along well as opposites. But there's another technique. And this is often used by car salesmen and things like that too. Nothing against anybody who is a car salesman, or maybe your family's in car sales. But there's a technique called the lowballing technique. Now, sometimes I'll hear people use this term just to mean like insulting you with an offer of like a low price for something. It's not quite that. With the lowball technique, you start off with what seems like a really good deal, and then you change the conditions of the deal. So this is a compliance technique that involves offering an attractive deal and then changing the terms of the deal later, thus increasing the overall cost of the deal. All right, so as an example, maybe you're trying to buy a car or fancy electronics or something like that. And, all right, I did it again. Ran out of recording space, so I had to go and delete some things. So let's say you're going to buy a car, or you're thinking about buying a car. And the salesman, they might say, okay, right now we've got this deal. You know, you get so much off, and then you get free some service for a year, and they're giving you all these great deals. And you're like, that sounds good. That sounds reasonable to me. All right, let's do it. And then they go and they draft the paperwork. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're buying a big item like a car, a big electronic or something, it often takes a long time to draft that paperwork. And then you've invested all this time, and then they come in and they say, okay, here's the deal. I made a mistake. That offer I told you about, that's actually, that's no longer valid. So you're actually not going to get that discount. You're not going to get that free service for a year. All right, so we're still going forward, right? Now, you've already pictured yourself driving the car. You've already spent all this time drafting up the paperwork and stuff. And there will be people who are like, no, I'm not doing it. But many people, they'll say, oh, okay, I guess we have to go forward, even though I'm not getting the sweet deal that you enticed me with. When that is successful because of the lowballing technique. So lowballing, you offer a really good deal, and then you change something about the deal. Somebody could also do this if they're like selling something on like Craigslist or something. And they'll say, hey, come, I'm trying to sell this old exercise equipment. I'll bring it to your house. And you're like, oh, hey, that's a good price. I'll do that. And then you contact a person and they're like, yeah, thing is, you actually live far away from me. I'm realizing I've got a bad weekend coming up. I'm not actually going to be able to bring it to your house. You're going to have to come get it. And you're like, oh, but one of the reasons I wanted to get this from you is because that you were going to bring it to me. And you're like, yeah, you still want it? And some people, since again, they've already imagined themselves with the product, they've already spent the time, communicating with you about it. They're like, oh, okay, whatever, I'll go get it myself. So that is the lowballing technique. All right, so these are all techniques for compliance. In the next video, we're going to talk about something related but a little different called obedience.